How's it going, YouTube? And welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to highlight the main differences between the F-150 truck Coyote versus its Mustang counterpart. I was actually surprised that a video like this hasn't already been done, and I was even more surprised at how hard it was to find information for the F-150 variants in general. Anyways, I'm not really going to sit and focus on the generational differences between each Coyote because that has been done already, and there's plenty of information out there. I will touch base on the important details of each generation, but I'm mainly focused on directly comparing the truck Coyote to the Mustang Coyote, generation to generation. So we'll start from the beginning, the Gen 1 Coyote. Here's a brief overview of the Gen 1 Mustang Coyote. It has an 11:1 compression ratio, and for the 11 to 12 model years it made 412 horsepower and 390 foot-pounds of torque. Also unique to the 11 and 12 engines are oil squirters. The 13 to 14 engines did away with the oil squirters and received a bump in horsepower to 420. The 13 and 14 engines now include a phosphorus coating on the pistons. Now onto the Gen 1 truck Coyote. It has a lower 10.5:1 compression ratio and makes 360 horsepower and 380 foot-pounds of torque. Compared to the Mustang, it has a different intake manifold, different pistons, hence the lower compression, a different set of intake camshafts, but the exhaust camshafts are the exact same as the Mustangs. It has a smaller oil pump housing and thinner oil pump gears. It has heavy cast iron manifolds. The oil filter housing sits up front, which differs from the Mustang, which sits on the driver's side of the block. The trucks also include an oil cooler within the oil filter housing. The Mustangs only had this on the track pack options. Trucks use a 4 and 6 rib belt drive harmonic balancer, while the Mustang uses a dual 6 rib balancer. The truck's timing cover is slightly different. The Gen 1 truck engine is the only truck engine that shares the same exact firing order as the Mustang's Coyote. Like the 11 and 12 Mustang engines, the truck counterparts also had oil squirters. The connecting rods, heads, crankshaft, and block are the exact same as the Mustangs. Cosmetically, the truck engines didn't come with the intake manifold cover and the gray powered by Ford coil covers like the Mustang did. With the evolution of the Coyote, we need to touch base with the Boss 302's engine, the Roadrunner, as it paved the way for the Gen 2's upgrades. The Boss 302 Roadrunner is a factory forged 5.0 essentially. It included CNC machine heads, forged rods, pistons, and crankshaft, stiffer valve springs, higher lift exhaust camshafts, sodium-filled exhaust valves for better heat dissipation, and a revised short runner intake manifold for high RPM. The Roadrunner was a fully forged, track-oriented, high-revving Coyote basically. Now on to the Gen 2. As mentioned, most of those Boss 302 upgrades found their way in the Gen 2 Coyote. The Gen 2 Mustang Coyote's compression ratio remained 11:1, just like the Gen 1. The Mustang's Gen 2 made 435 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque. The Gen 2 Coyote received some upgraded bits from the Boss 302 versus the previous Gen 1 Coyote, including the stiffer valve springs, higher lift intake camshafts, and forged connecting rods. The Gen 2 also has larger intake and exhaust valves with different pistons to accommodate for those larger valves. The Gen 2 heads are cast, but the revised castings are superior to the Gen 1's, and they flow even better than the CNC'd Roadrunner heads. The intake manifold now has charged motion control valves to increase combustion efficiency. The major difference now with the Gen 2 truck Coyote is that the firing order has changed versus the Mustang. The Gen 2 truck Coyote's compression ratio remained 10.5:1, just like the Gen 1 truck engine. It now makes 385 horsepower and 387 foot-pounds of torque. Much like how the Gen 1 truck and Mustang engines compare, the truck Gen 2 mimics those same differences. It features a different intake manifold, different pistons, hence the lower compression, and different intake camshafts. The oil filter housing is still located in the front. Gen 2 truck engines still have different timing covers and still use the 4 and 6 rib harmonic balancers. The Gen 2 truck's oil pump gears are still thinner and weaker, but just like the Gen 1 counterparts, the Gen 2 truck engine's block, crank, heads, and connecting rods are the exact same as the Gen 2 Mustangs. Now onto the Gen 3 Coyote. The Gen 3 Mustang engine's compression ratio is now 12:1. It makes 460 horsepower and 420 foot-pounds of torque. The Gen 3 Coyote is now direct injected along with the original port injection. The Gen 3 has a larger 93mm bore that brings total engine displacement to an actual 5 liter versus the prior Gen 1 and Gen 2's 4.9 liters. The cylinder walls are now plasma lined like the GT500's Trinity 5.8 engine. The Gen 3 has even larger valves versus the Gen 2, and even more lift in both sets of camshafts along with stiffer valve springs. The Gen 3 heads also flow better than the Gen 2 heads, and the Gen 3 now features a revised harmonic balancer like a fluid damper for higher RPM applications. The Gen 3 oil pans are now a composite plastic versus metal on the prior generation engines. And now on to the truck's Gen 3 Coyote. It retains the same 12:1 compression ratio, just like the Mustang now. It makes 390 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque. And just like the Gen 2 truck engine, it still has a different firing order from the Mustang. And just like the previous differences between the Gen 2 truck and Gen 2 Mustang engine, is that the Gen 3 truck engine shares all of those same differences: timing cover, harmonic balancer, camshafts, intake manifold, and exhaust manifolds. The new exception with the Gen 3 truck engine is that it now shares the same pistons as its Mustang counterpart, which is why they both now have the same compression ratio. The 21 and up truck engines now have a wet belt driven oil pump, and the wet belt also has replaced the secondary timing chains as well. As you can basically see, with all generations, the truck Coyote basically differs from their Mustang counterparts largely by their intake manifolds, lower lift intake camshafts, a more restrictive set of exhaust manifolds, timing covers, harmonic balancers, oil pump gears, oil pump housings, and the oil filter location. The Gen 2 and Gen 3 truck engines have a different firing order versus its Mustang counterpart. The Gen 3 truck engine differs slightly versus its prior generation truck engines, as it now shares the same higher compression pistons with the Mustang. The 21 and up truck engines have a wet belt driven oil pump, along with wet belts that took the place of the secondary timing chains. The 21 and up Mustang engines do not have these belts, only the trucks. The 21 and up truck engines also received a larger 87mm throttle body versus the 80mm on the earlier Gen 3 truck engines. And due to that, the engine got a bump to 400 horsepower and 410 foot-pounds of torque. I'm not really going to mention the Gen 4 simply because there's not a truck variant currently. Some people consider the 21 and up truck engines to be considered a Gen 3.5, but there is no true 4th generation F-150 Coyote as of now. You can order a single throttle body Gen 4 crate Coyote that is tunable, but the dual throttle body Gen 4 is speed density controlled and is not tunable. And that basically sums up the differences between the Mustang and F-150 Coyote engines during each generation. Hopefully this video was helpful for choosing the right Coyote for your swap, and as always, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.